Aloha. All right. Hope everyone's doing well. We are back in applied animal nutrition. Great. I hope everybody's doing good. Everybody is practicing good hygiene and social distancing. I am here in dear old CAB 102 with my friend Hermie, the hermit crab, to give me some moral support. And we're going to move right along. Very cool. So I figured as we would get this started, I'm going to try not have these videos, individual videos, go too long. Just because it's hard to watch a 30-minute talk, right? But without a whole lot of back and forth, that ought to be pretty easy to accomplish. Let's see, lab periods. We will meet via Zoom, not this week, Tuesday, but next week we will. And we'll just check in, see how everybody's doing, line up a little more some of the rest of the semester, and make sure we're all on the same page, okay? All right, so to bring us back into it, we're going to go over what we've been talking about actually a good amount, right? Is ration formulation. So today, this is up on Laulima, so please just use this talk, right, as a complement, right, to the online slides. I think we're backwards here, so you're not going to be able to tell anyway, but just follow along on your slides. So our objective today, using feeding standard tables. Wow, y'all pretty much already know that, right? We'll use mathematical solutions to do diet formulations using a number of different feedstuffs. And the purpose of formulation of vitamin and mineral premixes. That ought to be a little self-explanatory when we just ran through some of these Pearson squares balancing, right, for energy, then crude protein, then lysine, right? Then we can, if we work all the way down, right, we'll end up doing 1,000 different formulations. So sometimes those little vitamin and mineral premixes give you a really nice shortcut, right? Here is my clicker. Okay. Feeding standard tables can be found from nutrient requirement data that has been gotten by the National Research Council, right? As well as extension publications, university data. They're fairly easy to find, right? I provided a number of those for, I think I provided the swine, right? For different growing stages of swine, and then cattle. So for our nutrient requirement data, okay, remember that the rule of thumb is 2% dry matter intake per day, right, of the animal's weight, right? So for our nutrient requirement data, we'll generally have, I think you noticed it from the handouts that I gave out earlier, we'll have different size classes of animals, right, because they're going to be needing different amounts of different feedstuffs. Okay, so nutrient requirement data is what we need, and then we're going to be working with a number of different feedstuffs, and so we're going to need to know what the components of the feedstuffs that we're working with are in order to balance them for what we need, right? Obviously. So we can get that from also the National Research Council and also university and also commercial publications. So a lot of feed producers, right, will have their dietary information, right, provided already. So here's an example nutrient requirement table for dairy cattle. Okay, so we'll look at there's a small breed, right, mature weight 450 kilograms, and then we'll have our different size classes. So we'll just pick our closest, the one we're closest to, 100, 150 kilograms, what have you. And then we're going to have our average daily consumption, right, of kilograms per day, okay? Dairy animals, right? Walk off the screen here. Dairy animals have a much different and generally much more quality, higher quality diet than, beef cattle, right? So not only are we going to have to feed depending on the size of the animal, but also how much milk we're going to want to be. Great, so up top we've got all our different kinds of energy components, right? Our RDP, rumen degradable protein, rumen undegradable protein, in both gram mass and then percent of the total diet. And then over here, our beloved crude protein, our calcium and phosphorus. Okay. Here's another one, similar, right, to large breed cattle, also for dairy animals. And then on this one is where we have our projected, our amount of, I beg your pardon, the amount of milk that we're shooting to produce per animal, right? So we are, cattle can have, dairy animals can have all different kinds of output of milk, right? We're generally talking about the peak production, right? But it'll depend on size and class and breed, etc. So if you have an idea of what your animal will be producing, okay, then you can find on the daily nutrient requirement tables, okay, exactly what you're looking for, and then formulate your ration accordingly, okay? How do we use them? We already know the main way, right? So consult the texts, right? Consult the requirement tables for your class and animal species, right? And find what you're going to need, okay? Prepare your list of available feedstuffs, right, that you'll be working on, whatever that may be. Whatever that may be is going to be determined by generally what you have, right? Unless you're working for a multi-millionaire that just says, "What? Just give me the best diet formulation, what have you? Money's no problem," right? We mentioned a lot of times, especially in swine, we're going to be using kind of what we can get, and then using this math, right, to balance, to make the most efficient use of whatever we can get, right? Prepare a list of nutrient composition of the feeds that you are going to be using, and balance the ration based on the animal that you're going for's needs, okay? Check and recheck the ration, of course. So, even I'll be, if I was going to be doing this via Pearson Square, right, I'd want to be rechecking my whole process, okay? And then once I have it formulated, right, looking at the components that are in that formulated ration and actually going backwards and making sure that the amounts present in that ration we just balanced are actually going to give what we need for the animal, okay? So, key things we're looking for, dry matter is a big one, right? When we balance for swine, generally a little rule of thumb, right, is to balance for energy first and then go into your further classifications such as crude or digestible protein. Okay, I'm going to start big, right? Get your main ingredients in there, right? And then start seeing where you're going to need to add your more supplementals, okay? Our energy, total digestible nutrients, digestible energy, metabolizable energy, net energy, okay? Estimation of the dry matter intake. We want to use the upper limits here just to cover our bases, essentially, okay? We want to be operating at an optimal, right? If we were going to be practicing empty bunk feeding, right, we want to be a little more careful about this. And as we saw from our little video talking about that, right? It's that's kind of an added management procedure, okay? So we want to, once we have our rations made, then we can start to tweak with the actual amounts that we're putting out to them, okay? Calcium and phosphorus, also very important, and some things, we saw them in the daily nutrient requirement tables, okay, and we can balance them just like we can balance for anything else, okay? And so calcium and phosphorus, I think we mentioned one, if you are lacking there, mentioned one of the sources of calcium, at least, right, was limestone, right? Agricultural lime, essentially. So agricultural lime, for instance, will have such a high amount of calcium, right, relative to your formulated feed, depending on what that is, right, that it'll take a generally small amount of limestone, agricultural lime, to actually get your calcium requirement. So, as you can see, right, going essentially from big to small in our balancing. And then finally our vitamins. And hopefully we're using premixes, right, so we can take that nutrient component as a whole, as a bundle, right, and fix and balance it out for that whole bundle instead of having to go through each one, right? So, check and recheck for deficiencies, excesses, especially in your minerals, your palatability. Okay, we mentioned that even if you have the most perfect formulation on paper, it's not always going to translate. Okay, so what was a good anhydrous ammonia, right? Can be tasty with small amounts, but once we start pushing the percentage that is in the feed, then it's really going to turn animals off to it, and then our animals' dry matter daily intake is going to go down, and then our gains are going to all go out the window. Check your physical forms of your feed. We spent a good amount of time talking about processing feeds, why we do it, right, etc. So same thing. You really just want to make sure that it doesn't only look good on paper, right, but that it'll actually be able to be fed, right? If you have automatic feeding systems, then you're going to want to make sure that even if your little ration that you've done up in your air-conditioned lab is perfect numerically for your size and class of animals, okay, then you're going to want to make sure that you're actually going to be able to physically do that, right? It's not going to be blowing all around in the wind, and you're going to have an empty dump truck before you're halfway down the first feeding bunker. And generally, I think a good thing to keep in mind here is that we're going to be within the confines of economics, okay? So, if you have options, okay, then you're going to want to use the most economical one. That's the other really great part about knowing what's in your feedstuffs, right? To a T, the nutrient contents of those things, right? Because if you have a lot of your nutrients in a cheaper feed, or maybe at some instance, you know, you have a big lack of just some component, protein or phosphorus, etc., right? And then you have a big source of something, maybe some old, you know, truck from a broiler house, a chicken broiler house, has a new truckload of broiler meal, right? So you want to be loose, and you want to be able to be flexible, right? Kind of like current times, okay? And you want to be able to utilize the math of diet formulation on the go, right? So you can do this all the time. At the beginning, it can feel like a pain in the butt, but then once it's hardwired into that our little Pearson square process is hardwired in, it's really very easy, okay? So you should just, on the back of an envelope, right, if you get a guy on the phone and says, hey, we got a truckload of boiler chicken residue byproduct, right? You can go look up that broiler chicken residue from one of those tables that are online on Google, right? While you're still on the phone with them, do a quick little math check and decide if that's going to be a good idea or not. And then you're going to want to make sure that your salt and all your minerals and vitamins are all accounted for. Let's break these videos up and call that one right there.